The rain drummed insistently on the roof of the cabin, a steady rhythm that filled the silence. Alex sat alone in the dim amber glow of a single lamp, its light pooling over the cluttered desk strewn with notebooks and dog-eared paperbacks. The faint acrid scent of a night storm lingered in the air, mingling with the comforting aroma of worn paper. Alec absently rubbed his jaw, where the beginnings of a beard were starting to appear, and flipped another page of his book. This place, nestled deep in the forest, was his refuge from the world. Peaceful. Isolated. Exactly how he wanted it. The first knock was so soft, he almost dismissed it as a trick of the wind. But the second was firmer, unmistakable. Alec frowned, setting his book aside. Someone knocking here on a stormy night was about as probable as the rain turning to wine. He rose slowly, his hand brushing the old iron poker leaning near the fireplace. He wasn't expecting anyone. No one should even know how to find this cabin miles from the nearest town. The door creaked as he opened it, hinges groaning in protest. And there she stood. Rainwater streamed from her ashen blue skin, pooling at her feet. Her large, silvery eyes caught the lamplight, their reflective surface shimmering like liquid mercury. Her golden dreadlocks clung to her face, drenched from the storm, and a faintly iridescent cloak draped her delicate frame. "Hello," she said softly, her voice melodic and layered, like the echo of distant chimes. Alec blinked, gripping the doorframe. "Are you lost?" She tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "Not exactly. Right?" He narrowed his eyes. "You're standing on my porch in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night. What are you, a wandering poet?" "My name is Alara," she replied as if that explained everything. "Well, Alara, what do you want?" He gestured toward the rain-soaked forest behind her. She paused, her silver eyes steady. "Shelter." The simplicity of her request caught him off guard. Alec's rational mind immediately conjured a dozen reasons why this was a terrible idea. Strange woman, stormy night, isolated cabin, prime horror story material. He crossed his arms. "Let me guess. No ID, no phone, no explanation?" Her gaze didn't waver. "I have traveled far. I am tired. I do not wish to be alone." Alec sighed, his unease tangled with reluctant curiosity. Against his better judgment, he stepped aside. "Fine. Come in. Just don't drip on my books." Alara moved into the warmth of the cabin, her steps deliberate, almost weightless. She surveyed the space with quiet intensity, her silver eyes drifting from the rough-hewn beams overhead to the cluttered bookshelves. "You live alone," she observed. "Brilliant deduction," Alec muttered, tossing her a towel. "Dry off before you short-circuit or whatever." She caught it with inhuman precision, her movements eerily graceful. "You joke often." "Better than screaming into the void," he quipped, settling back into his chair. Alara tilted her head. "The void does not respond well to humor." Alec raised an eyebrow. "Speaking from experience?" Her expression grew distant. "Yes." The fire crackled softly as the rain battered the cabin. Alec tried to ignore the weight of her presence, the way it seemed to hum faintly in the air, electric and unsettling. "So," he said finally, "you've got the look of someone either incredibly lost or running from something. Which is it?" Her hands tightened on the towel, her knuckles pale. "Both?" The way she said it, so flat and certain, made Alec sit up straighter. "Care to elaborate?" "I was watched. For a long time," she admitted, her voice low. "I came here to escape." "Watched? By who?" Her silvery eyes darkened, shadows swirling within them. "The Seekers." "Catchy name," Alec muttered. "And these Seekers, government agents? Aliens? Nosy neighbors with binoculars?" "They are none of those things." "Super helpful." Alara's gaze bore into him. "They do not sleep. They do not blink. They slip into the spaces between thought where fear festers. And they feed." Alec forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow. "Quite the imagination you've got there." She said nothing. Outside, the wind howled against the cabin, and for a moment, Alec couldn't shake the sense that something unseen was peering through the cracks in the world. The knock came again. Not at the front door this time, but from Alec's bedroom. He groaned, dragging himself out of bed. "Is this going to be a regular thing with you?" Alara stood in the doorway, her golden dreadlocks glowing faintly in the dim light. She looked smaller, more vulnerable. Her silver eyes shimmered with something unfamiliar, fear. "I need to ask something of you," she said softly. Alec crossed his arms. "Let me guess. Galactic directions? My toaster as an interstellar beacon? I would like to sleep next to you tonight." His brain screeched to a halt. "I what?" Sleep. Next to you, she repeated, her voice calm but insistent. In this room. On this bed. Alec blinked, trying to process her words. Wow. My charm must be working overtime. Charm? She echoed, tilting her head. Never mind, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. Look, humans don't usually do this. Boundaries, you know? I am not human, she said simply. And I do not wish to be alone. Alec sighed, her words pulling at something he didn't fully understand. Why? Her gaze didn't waver. The dark? He snorted. You're afraid of the dark? You've traveled across the universe and that's what scares you? It is not the darkness itself, Ilara said quietly. It is what hides within it. The seekers. The weight of her plea pressed against him, and Alec finally relented with a frustrated sigh. Fine. You win. Just, don't make this weirder than it already is. The bed was small, forcing Alec to lie stiffly on one side while Ilara lay on the other, her hands folded neatly over her chest. This isn't weird at all, he muttered. I appreciate your kindness, she said softly. Yeah, well, I'm a sucker for strange stories, he replied. Outside, the wind howled and the shadows in the cabin seemed to shift. Alec tried to ignore the faint electric hum that lingered in the air, the subtle pull of her presence beside him. You don't sleep much, do you? He asked suddenly. I cannot, Ilara replied, her voice quiet. Sleep is an invitation. They hunt in the silence between dreams. Alec swallowed, her words lingering in the air like smoke. And for the first time he wondered if the spaces between silence and sleep really were as safe as they seemed. Chapter 2. Shadows Between. The storm raged through the night, the rain thrumming against the cabin windows in relentless waves. Alec lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling above him, aware of every breath, every small shift in the narrow bed. Beside him, Ilara was utterly still, her golden dreadlocks fanned across the pillow like a halo. She didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe, though her presence was undeniable. It wasn't just her physical closeness, it was something deeper, something unspoken. The air around her felt alive, humming faintly, as if the very fabric of the room bent slightly to accommodate her. Sleep teased the edges of Alec's mind, but he resisted it. Ilara's earlier words haunted him. They hunt in the silence between dreams. Do you ever feel them coming? He asked into the dark, his voice barely more than a whisper. Her silver eyes opened, catching the faint glow of the embers in the fireplace. Yes, she said after a pause. The air grows thin. The silence sharpens. And then, they slip through. Alec's stomach tightened. What do they want? Ilara turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting his. Fear. It is their sustenance. They find it in the places where the mind is most vulnerable. Alec let out a breath, running a hand through his hair. Great. So basically don't get scared. Easy enough, right? She tilted her head. Fear is not so simple. It lingers even when unwelcome. You cannot banish it through sheer will. It seeps into the cracks of your thoughts, unbidden. Her words sent a shiver down his spine, but Alec forced a grin, trying to break the tension. Well, I've got plenty of practice suppressing existential dread. I'll be fine. Ilara didn't smile. Her gaze flickered to the window, where the rain lashed violently against the glass. They are closer tonight. Alec frowned, sitting up slightly. Closer? What does that mean? The storm hides them, she murmured, her voice distant. They move with the shadows, slipping through the noise. It's why I came here, to escape their reach. But they may have followed. Followed you? To my cabin? He felt a spike of irritation rise above his unease. Fantastic. Should have put up a no supernatural stalkers allowed sign. Ilara didn't respond. Her eyes remained locked on the window, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Alec thought she might be exaggerating, just some strange alien paranoia. But then he felt it. It was subtle at first, an almost imperceptible shift in the room's atmosphere. The air grew heavier, like the pressure before a thunderclap. The shadows cast by the dying fire seemed darker, stretching across the walls unnaturally. Do you feel that? He asked, his voice tight. Ilara nodded, her movements slow. They are testing the boundaries. Testing? Testing for what? Cracks, she whispered. They slipped through the smallest weaknesses. Alec swung his legs over the side of the bed, his heart pounding. All right, this is officially beyond my pay grade. What do we do? Ilara sat up as well, her movements smooth and deliberate. Stay awake. Do not let them into your thoughts. If you feel them, focus on something solid, something real. Alec glanced around the dim cabin. The fire was nearly out, the remaining embers glowing faintly. He grabbed the poker and jabbed at the logs, trying to coax a flame back to life. Sparks crackled weakly, but the fire refused to grow. The heaviness in the room deepened. The shadows on the walls seemed to writhe now, moving in ways that didn't match the flickering light. Alec's breath quickened. He gripped the poker tightly, his knuckles white. "Ilara," he said, his voice low. "They're moving." She stood, her golden dreadlocks glinting faintly in the dim light. "Do not look at them directly," she warned. "They thrive on attention. Acknowledge them and they will grow stronger." "Noted," Alec muttered, forcing his eyes to the floor. But it was hard to ignore the crawling sensation at the edges of his vision, the way the shadows seemed to press closer, inch by inch. "Focus," Ilara said, her voice calm but firm. "Speak to me. Anchor yourself in this moment." Alec forced out a shaky laugh. "Right. Small talk to keep the nightmare monsters at bay. Got it. So, how'd you end up on this planet?" "I followed the stars," she said simply. "That's vague." "The stars speak if you know how to listen," she replied, her tone steady. "They guided me here. Away from them. And yet, here they are," Alec muttered, glancing toward the window. The shadows thickened, pooling in the corners of the room like ink. The hum in the air grew louder, a faint, droning vibration that made Alec's teeth ache. "Ilara," he said, his voice rising. "This isn't working." She stepped closer to him, her silver eyes glowing faintly now, as if lit from within. "Hold your ground, Alec. They cannot harm you if you do not give them power." "Easy for you to say," he snapped, gripping the poker like it was a lifeline. "You've been dealing with these things for, what, years?" "I'm just some guy trying to survive a Tuesday night." Ilara placed a hand on his arm, her touch cool but steady. "You are stronger than you think," she said quietly. "The fact that you are here, facing them, is proof of that." Alec swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling over him. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to meet her gaze. The shadows pressed closer, their inky forms stretching along the walls. And then, just at the edge of his hearing, he heard it, a whisper. Soft, almost gentle, but insidious. Words he couldn't understand, curling through his mind like smoke. "Do not listen," Ilara said sharply, her grip on his arm tightening. Alec clenched his jaw, trying to block out the sound. But it was persistent, worming its way deeper into his thoughts. His vision blurred, the cabin around him seeming to distort. The shadows pulsed, and the whisper grew louder, more insistent. "Alec?" Ilara's voice cut through the haze, sharp and clear. He blinked, focusing on her face, on the steady glow of her silver eyes. The whispers receded slightly, the shadows pulling back. "Stay with me," she said firmly. "Do not let them take hold." Alec nodded, his breathing uneven. Okay. I'm here. I'm here." The shadows lingered, swirling at the edges of the room, but they didn't advance further. For now. Ilara released his arm, her expression grim. "They are testing you," she said softly. "But they will not stop." "Great," Alec muttered, running a hand through his hair. "So what do we do now?" She looked toward the window, her silver eyes narrowing. "We fight." Chapter 3, In the Quiet Dark. Alec's heart pounded in his chest, each beat reverberating through his entire body. He hadn't realized how tense his muscles were until the immediate danger passed, but the oppressive stillness in the room remained. The shadows hadn't completely receded. They hovered like dark sentinels in the corners of his vision, as if waiting for him to slip up. The fire in the hearth crackled, sending a few embers hissing to the stone floor, but it wasn't enough to dispel the chill in the air. Ilara stood, her body poised like she was anticipating the next strike, her golden dreadlocks glowing faintly in the dim light. "Fight," Alec muttered under his breath, still trying to steady his breathing. "Right. That's comforting." "They are not like anything you've faced before," Ilara said, her voice distant, as if her mind were already elsewhere, on some distant battlefield. "You must understand, Alec. They do not fight with physical strength. They invade the mind." Alec rubbed his temples, trying to process it all. His brain refused to cooperate, stuck in the space between disbelief and reality. "So what, we just think them away? Send them a strongly worded letter?" Ilara's eyes flicked to him, her gaze sharp. "Do not underestimate them. Fear is their weapon, and they do not relent." She paused, then added, almost to herself, "You will need more than just willpower to survive them." Alec raised an eyebrow, his unease beginning to merge with frustration. "And what exactly does that mean, Ilara? Am I supposed to just give up my thoughts to you? Borrow your alien powers?" For the first time, Ilara let a soft smile touch her lips, but it was fleeting, like a shadow passing over the moon. "No, Alec. I will help, but the power is within you. Alex stared at her. What kind of help are we talking about here? Stay close, she said, her voice low but commanding. When they come again, you must focus on us. On this place, this moment, this shared space. There is strength in it. Right? Alec muttered. Get all sentimental and hope for the best. The Watchers do not just feed on fear. They feed on loneliness, Ilara added softly. They are parasites of isolation. But you are not alone, Alec. Not anymore. Alec blinked at her, the weight of her words settling into the pit of his stomach. It wasn't just about surviving, this was about fighting back but doing so in a way that felt wrong. He wasn't used to depending on anyone. Certainly not some mysterious alien who had showed up uninvited at his door. I'm not exactly a team player, he admitted, letting out a short laugh, though it didn't feel genuine. But sure, let's make this work. Ilara's gaze softened, though her wariness never quite disappeared. She moved away from him then, crossing the cabin to the window. The rain had lessened, but the wind still howled outside, sending tremors through the walls. She stood there, watching the darkened forest, her posture regal and focused as if she were waiting for something, or someone. I think they will come again soon, she said after a long silence. Yeah, I got that feeling. Alec leaned against the back of his chair, a hand gripping the worn fabric. So what's the plan? Ilara's eyes flicked to him, her lips pressing together in thought. You must hold your ground, she said simply. And do not let them into your thoughts. Alec shot her a wry look. Oh, is that all? Hold my ground. Don't let them in. Got it? But even as the words left his mouth, Alec's gut tightened. The air in the room had shifted again, and the shadows, those shadows, felt closer now, pressing in on the edges of his vision. There was a subtle tremor in the floorboards beneath him. The low hum of something just outside his perception. The Watchers were near. Without thinking, he stood and walked over to the window, joining Ilara at her side. The wind rattled the glass, and the trees swayed violently in the distance. I don't get it, he muttered. How did you end up here? With me, I mean? Ilara didn't answer immediately. She stared out at the storm for a moment, her silver eyes unfocused, as if the answer was buried in the storm itself. I came to this planet in search of refuge. I had been running for a long time. Alec's eyebrow twitched. Running from what? The Watchers, she said quietly, almost as if speaking the name aloud might summon them. I thought I had outrun them, but they are persistent. Alec's mind raced. And what exactly are they? I mean, besides creepy, shadowy stalkers? She glanced at him. They are not of this world. Not of your world. They come from the spaces between realities. They do not belong here. Alec exhaled sharply, rubbing his face. You're telling me you're being hunted by interdimensional creatures? And you thought coming to my cabin would be a good place to hide? Your cabin is isolated, Ilara said, turning her head back to the window. They cannot sense me here as easily. Nice, Alec muttered. So, I'm basically just your hideout now. The quiet exchange was broken by a sudden shift in the room. The temperature dropped sharply, and Alec felt the hairs on his neck stand on end. The shadows had deepened, stretching unnaturally long. Now, Ilara whispered, her voice low and commanding. They are here. The hum, that strange vibration in the air, grew louder. Alec's heart hammered in his chest. He tried to focus on the fire in the hearth, the warmth that still clung to the air despite the cold creeping in, but it was getting harder. The shadows seemed to pull at him, reaching for his thoughts, probing for cracks. Remember, Ilara said, her voice steady even as the weight of the room pressed down on both of them. Focus on us. On now. They cannot feed on connection. Alec's breath quickened, and despite the urge to panic, he forced himself to look at her. At her calm, golden-eyed face. Her steady presence, even in the face of something so utterly foreign, somehow grounded him. For the first time since she had arrived, Alec felt something like clarity. Then the darkness surged. It wasn't a physical thing, not really. It was the absence of everything, of thought, of warmth, of light. The space around them seemed to shrink as if the room itself was closing in. Alec could feel it like a weight pressing against his chest, suffocating him with its cold. A whisper reached his ears, softer than the wind outside but just as persistent. He didn't understand the words, but he felt the intent behind them. It wasn't just an invitation, it was a command. Focus, Ilara said again, this time with urgency. Focus on me. Alec clenched his fists, fighting the rising panic. He had to focus. He had to. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. Slowly his breath steadied. The shadows swirled, but they didn't advance. Alec fought to maintain his grip on the moment, on the connection he shared with the woman beside him. This moment, this space. For now it was enough. But the Watchers were patient. And they would be back. Chapter 4. The Watchers' Whispers. The storm outside raged louder, but inside the cabin felt eerily still. Alec could hear the pounding of his own heartbeat, each thrum reverberating in his chest, but the strange, suffocating darkness in the room had retreated for now. He exhaled, long and slow, trying to shake the disorienting pull of the shadows that had nearly consumed him. Ilara stood beside him, her posture unwavering, her silver eyes scanning the room as though she could see the very air shifting. "They're gone," Alec murmured, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it. There was something there, still, in the corners of his mind. Something clinging to him, waiting. "No," Ilara said softly, shaking her head. "They are never truly gone. They are always near, lurking in the spaces between thoughts." Alec's throat tightened. "Great. That's exactly what I needed to hear." She turned toward him, her gaze steady and knowing. "You must understand, Alec. The Watchers do not hunt in the traditional sense. They do not chase you physically. They feed on your thoughts, on your fear, on your isolation. The more you let them into your mind, the stronger they become. Then how do I keep them out?" Alec's voice was rough, the reality of the situation pressing down on him with a weight he couldn't ignore. "How do I fight something like that?" Ilara's lips parted as though she were about to answer, but then the room shifted again, just a little. The air grew colder. A chill crept up Alec's spine, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer, deeper. This time there was no sound. Not a whisper. But Alec could feel it. The same presence from earlier, closing in. "No," Ilara muttered under her breath. Her voice was low but filled with a kind of sharp intensity that Alec had never heard before. "They are here." Alec froze. His breath hitched as he searched the room, his eyes darting over the wooden beams of the ceiling, the windows where rain had begun to streak the glass, the stone hearth that still flickered weakly. There was nothing, but he could feel it, the creeping, suffocating weight of the Watchers pressing against the very edges of his mind. He stepped closer to Ilara, instinctively reaching for her, though he didn't know why. She was the only thing here that felt real, the only thing that didn't seem to shimmer or distort in the unnatural dark. Ilara's eyes snapped to his and she took a sharp breath, her fingers curling into her palms. "They are trying to split us apart. To make you doubt." Alec swallowed hard. "What does that mean?" "Their power lies in creating rifts, moments of weakness," she said, her voice strained. "They find those cracks in your mind where doubt, fear, and loneliness linger. You cannot let them win, Alec. You must stand firm." "Stand firm?" Alec echoed, his hands balling into fists. "I don't even know what I'm fighting." Ilara's gaze softened just a little, though the edge of her fear never fully left. "You are fighting for your mind. For control. For yourself." Alec's head was spinning. He couldn't think straight with the weight of the shadows pushing against him. He wanted to scream. To run. But something in Ilara's steady presence kept him rooted in place. "I'm not a hero," Alec muttered, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "I'm not the guy who does this." "You do not have to be," Ilara replied, her voice like a balm to his nerves. "You only have to be strong enough for now. That is all." The words lingered, soothing, but something still shifted in the room. Alec could feel it. The Watchers hadn't gone, not really. The presence was still there, just out of sight, like an itch just beneath his skin that couldn't be scratched. Suddenly the air felt thinner. It wasn't just cold now, it was suffocating. Alec could hear a faint, high-pitched sound in his ears, a noise that didn't belong, a pulse of something not quite human. His pulse quickened. The shadows were alive, moving around him like wisps of smoke, slipping in and out of his vision. The room was stretching, warping. Everything felt wrong. "Ilara," he whispered, his voice cracking with unease. "What's happening?" She turned to face him, her expression hardening. "They are testing you." The air around them crackled. The shadows deepened again, pulling closer like a dark tide, swirling with the sound of whispers. Alec could feel them in his bones now, voices. Faint, distant, but they were there, creeping into his mind. Cold, cruel whispers. They wanted him to listen. They wanted him to doubt. But Ilara stepped forward, her hand reaching for his. She gripped his wrist, her touch solid and grounding. "Do not listen," she said, her voice sharp and clear, cutting through the rising panic. "You must not listen to them." Alec could barely hear her over the rushing sound in his ears, but he nodded, his breath coming in short bursts. Her grip on his wrist tightened, and suddenly he felt a sense of warmth, of presence, a strength that wasn't his but still real. And then there it was, a shuddering silence. The Watchers were still there. Alec could feel their presence in every fiber of his being, but their whispers had quieted. For a moment they held back and Alec had no idea why. "What did you do?" Alec asked, his voice ragged. "I protected you," Elara replied, her tone low but with an unmistakable force behind it. "But they will return, Alec. They will not stop until they have what they want." "What do they want?" Alec whispered, his voice trembling. Elara hesitated. "You," she said softly, her eyes scanning the shadows. "They want you, Alec. Your mind. Your fear." Alec took a step back, swallowing hard. The weight of her words hit him all at once. "So, they want to turn me into some kind of meal?" Elara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped toward the hearth, her back straight. "Not a meal, no. But they feed off fear. And the deeper the fear, the stronger they grow." Alec watched her, trying to grasp the enormity of it all. "And I'm supposed to just stand here and not be afraid?" "Yes," Elara replied, her voice unwavering. "You must find a way to push them back. You must confront them head on." "I'm not a fighter," Alec said quietly, his voice cracking with uncertainty. I'm just a guy." Elara turned to him, her expression softening, her eyes filled with something like understanding. "You are more than you know. We all are. Fear is not the enemy, Alec. It is what you do with it." Alec stared at her for a long moment, her words settling into his mind like seeds, but he wasn't sure how to grow them into something that could save him. But then, in the heart of the storm, amidst the crackling of the fire and the eerie hum of something unseen and insidious, Alec made a choice. He was going to fight. And somehow he would survive. Chapter 5. Into the dark. The cabin felt colder, but it wasn't just the weather outside. Alec could feel it in his bones, an unnatural chill that wasn't about temperature but about something deeper. Something that reached into his thoughts and tried to tear them apart. The Watchers were still there. He could feel their presence just beyond his awareness, like a weight pressing down on him from all directions. Elara stood at the hearth, her hands raised, fingers splayed in front of the dying flames. Her face was serene, but her eyes were narrowed, focused on something Alec couldn't see. He shifted uncomfortably, his back stiff as he watched her. She had done something earlier, some kind of warding, but it hadn't been enough. The shadows were back, slithering across the floor, creeping toward him like an unrelenting tide. Alec took a step toward her. "How do we make them go away?" "You said." "They won't leave until you're broken," Elara interrupted, her voice low, without a trace of fear. She didn't look at him but kept her attention fixed on the fire. "They feed on your fear, Alec. But they also feed on your doubt. You're the only one who can make them leave." Alec felt a sudden spike of panic. His chest tightened, his breath quickened. "How am I supposed to do that? I don't even know what I'm fighting." His voice came out sharp, desperate. "I'm just a guy." "I'm not." "You are," Elara said, her voice as steady as ever. She turned to him now, her eyes soft but intense. "You are more than what you think you are. The Watchers are just shadows in the mind. The darkness is in your head, Alec. They've been feeding off your fears for so long that you've forgotten how to fight back." He stared at her, still unsure. She seemed so sure, so confident in a way that he could never manage to be. It made him feel small, insignificant, a part of him desperate for her to take control, for her to fix everything. But Elara didn't move. She didn't act. She waited. She expected him to do something. And that thought, oddly enough, gave him a sliver of courage. "So what do I do?" he asked quietly, his voice wavering but determined. "How do I stop them?" Elara's gaze softened just a little, but she gave him no comfort. "You face them. You stop running. The Watchers will twist your mind, make you doubt yourself, but you must hold firm. Fear is a lie, Alec. The more you let it control you, the stronger they become." Alec swallowed, running a hand through his hair. I can't just stop being afraid. It's not that simple." "You don't have to stop being afraid," Elara replied, stepping toward him. Her voice was firm, but there was an edge of something almost kind in it. "You just have to stop letting it control you." Alec was silent for a moment. He had spent so much time running from his fears, burying them under distractions, pushing them down until they couldn't suffocate him. But it was never enough. His past, his mistakes, they lingered, those moments of guilt and loss, of feeling less than everyone else. Those were the things the Watchers fed on. Those were the cracks in his mind that they slipped through, making him feel small, weak, and terrified. "Elara," Alec said slowly, the weight of it all pressing down on him, "I'm not sure I can do this. I've never been the kind of person who fights. I run. I've always run." Ilara's expression softened, her silver eyes piercing his. You are not the man you think you are, Alec. You've faced so much already and you survived. You've been running because you didn't know how to fight. But you're standing here now, aren't you? He nodded, though it didn't feel like enough. I'm not asking you to be someone you're not. I'm asking you to be someone you are. The Watchers prey on your doubt. They feed on your inability to face the things that scare you the most. But they are nothing. Shadows. And shadows can only exist in the dark. Alec blinked at her, his mind racing. He had never been good at facing his own darkness, but Ilara was right. All his life he had run from it, buried it, let it fester until it became a part of him. But what if he didn't have to keep running? What if, just for once, he could stop? The air around him seemed to crackle, charged with a kind of silent tension. He could still feel them, the Watchers, lurking just out of sight, but this time something in him felt different. The knot in his chest loosened just a little. The whispers in the corners of his mind began to fade, like static slowly losing its grip. I can't do this alone, he said, the words coming more easily than he had expected. I'm not strong enough for this. You're not alone, Ilara replied, her voice like a cool breeze. You have me. You always will. For the first time since the storm had started, Alec felt something that wasn't fear. Something warmer, steadier. A kind of hope, fleeting and fragile but still present. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. He wasn't going to run anymore. Not tonight. Not when there was something, someone, to fight for. The fire crackled behind them, sending sparks into the air, but Alec's eyes never left Ilara. She stood there like a pillar of calm, a quiet strength that he could lean on. Maybe it was that presence, her presence, that was the key to pushing the darkness away. Maybe it was the connection between them, the simple knowledge that he didn't have to face this alone. He reached out, slowly, his fingers brushing against hers, and for the first time he didn't pull away. Ilara's fingers closed around his, warm and steady, her touch grounding him. We faced them together, Ilara said, her voice low but certain. Now let them come. And in that moment, Alec knew that they would. The Watchers were still out there, waiting, but they no longer held the power they once had. Because, for the first time, Alec wasn't afraid to stand his ground. He wasn't alone anymore. Chapter 6. The Silence Between Us. The night stretched on, deeper and more oppressive with each passing hour. The storm outside had lost none of its ferocity, and the wind howled like an animal caged in the trees. But inside the cabin, the only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the steady rhythm of Alec's breath. Ilara had withdrawn into herself again, her back to him as she stared into the flames, her silhouette framed by the shifting shadows. Alec, however, couldn't quite settle. Every now and then, his mind would drift back to the Watchers, the cold presence that seemed to be pressing in on him, just beyond the reach of his thoughts. The silence between him and Ilara wasn't helping either. The closeness they had shared earlier had dissipated, replaced by a strange, almost uncomfortable stillness. He shifted in his seat, running a hand through his hair. Ilara, he said, his voice breaking the silence. How do you do it? How do you stay so calm? She didn't answer immediately, but after a long moment she shifted, her gaze flicking to him. Her silver eyes gleamed in the dim light, but there was no trace of fear, no hint of uncertainty. Calm? Her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. I've had a long time to learn, Alec. A long time to understand the way the mind works. Fear is a choice, a reaction. But it's also something you can control. When you stop running from it, when you stop giving it power, it fades. Alec let her words linger in the air between them, but they didn't offer him the comfort he had hoped for. I'm not like you, he muttered, more to himself than to her. I've spent my life running. I'm not good at fighting things like fear. Or whatever it is we're up against. You're doing it now, Ilara replied softly, her gaze unwavering. You've chosen to stay. That's the first step. Alec wasn't sure if that was true, but he didn't have time to dwell on it. The weight of the night pressed down on him again, and despite his resolve, the dread was creeping back, settling coldly in his chest. Suddenly the air around them seemed to shift. A low hum, subtle at first, began to vibrate through the walls of the cabin, resonating in the bones of the wooden beams. It wasn't the storm nor the wind. This was something different. Alec's hand shot out, his fingers brushing the back of Ilara's arm. Do you hear that? He whispered urgently. She nodded, her eyes narrowing as if she had known it was coming. They're here. Alec's heart hammered in his chest. The Watchers. Not just them. Ilara's voice had dropped to a near whisper, but there was something sharp in it now, something that sent a chill crawling up his spine. There's something else. Something older. They're trying to break through. Alex stood abruptly, his breath quickening as he scanned the room. The air felt thicker now, and the dark corners of the cabin seemed to shift, as though the shadows themselves were alive, moving. He glanced toward Ilara. What do we do? How do we fight this? Ilara rose to her feet, her posture graceful, but her expression was grim. You can't fight what you don't understand. But you can fight yourself. Your fear. That's the only way to stop them. Alex swallowed, his throat dry. But, you said they're here in the cracks. I don't even know where to look. You won't find them by looking, she said, her voice steady but firm. You find them by feeling. They prey on your doubts, your weaknesses. The only way to stop them is to believe that they can't hurt you. Not here. Not now. Alex's mind raced. He didn't understand it all, but the urgency in her voice spurred him forward. I'm not sure I can. It's hard, Ilara. You said it yourself. I've spent my whole life running. I don't know how to stop. You will, she said simply. But you need to listen. They'll use your mind against you. The more you doubt, the stronger they become. Don't let them in, Alec. Keep your mind strong. The humming sound intensified, now a buzzing in the air, vibrating the very walls. It wasn't just a sound. It was a pressure, like something was pushing against the boundaries of reality, trying to break through. Ilara's eyes glowed faintly, the silver in them almost luminescent. You need to focus. Find the strength inside you, Alec. The fear doesn't control you unless you let it. Alec clenched his fists, but his hands trembled. The weight of everything, his past, his regrets, his fears, was pressing down on him like a vice. He couldn't think clearly. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a reminder of how fragile he was, how easy it would be to break. But then he remembered. He remembered her words. You're not alone. He wasn't alone. She was here. Ilara was standing beside him, a quiet anchor in the storm of his mind. And for the first time he felt the smallest flicker of hope. Alec closed his eyes, drawing in a deep breath. He focused on the steady beat of his heart, on the warmth of Ilara's presence beside him. He pushed the fear back, letting it wash over him but not allowing it to consume him. His mind, his thoughts, they were his to control. The humming grew louder. The shadows moved more aggressively, writhing against the walls, reaching out as though they were alive. But Alec stood tall. He had to. He opened his eyes, looking directly at the shadows that crawled across the floor, and he did the one thing that terrified him most. He stopped running. You can't have me, Alec whispered, his voice steady now. You can't control me. Ilara's eyes softened as she watched him, but her gaze never wavered from the encroaching darkness. They feed on your fear, she said. But fear only survives if you let it. Alec's gaze locked with hers. His breath was shallow, but his resolve was steady. I'm done letting it control me. The shadows hissed and swirled as if testing his resolve, but they could not touch him. They could not break him. At least not tonight. Chapter 7, Into the Silence. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin the oppressive silence had turned to something else. Something heavier. The shadows, which had once been confined to corners of the room, now pressed in on Alec and Ilara from all sides. They were no longer a mere presence. They were a threat, a suffocating weight that stretched every corner of the cabin to its limits. Alec stood still, hands clenched at his sides, eyes fixed on the dark shapes that shifted unnervingly in the dim light. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up as if the very air was charged with some invisible force. The humming that had filled the cabin moments ago was now silent, but in its place was a more sinister sound, a soft whispering like thousands of voices just on the edge of hearing. Ilara moved beside him, her movements graceful yet purposeful, as if she was attuned to some frequency Alec couldn't hear or understand. Her silver eyes glowed faintly in the darkened cabin, the light around her almost ethereal, like something not quite of this world. They're trying to get inside, Ilara murmured, her voice low, urgent. They're testing the cracks. Alec swallowed hard, his mouth dry. How do we stop them? Ilara didn't immediately answer. She stepped closer to him, her presence calming, but there was no mistaking the determination in her gaze. You must face them, she said, her words measured but resolute. You cannot escape the cracks by hiding in the shadows. You must see them for what they are and deny them. Alec's breath hitched as he took in her words. It was hard to grasp, the concept of standing firm against something so intangible, so overwhelming. The fear was still there, clawing at the edges of his mind, but this time he fought it back, one breath at a time. He couldn't afford to falter now. They feed on fear, Ilara continued. But they can't touch you if you don't let them. If you stand against them and refuse to let them in. I'm not sure I can do this, Alec admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I've spent so long being afraid. I don't know how to stop now. Ilara's eyes softened for a moment, and she placed a gentle hand on his arm. Fear is a learned response, Alec. It's not who you are. It's what you've been taught to believe. You are stronger than this. You've already taken the first step. He nodded, more to reassure himself than her. He knew what she meant. He had already made the choice to stay, to face the unknown instead of running. But now, standing in the midst of this unexplainable nightmare, he was unsure. His legs felt like they might buckle under him. His chest tightened, and his mind raced with thoughts of the darkness, the watchers, and the cold emptiness beyond. But then, something within him shifted. Ilara's presence beside him was solid, grounding. She had faced far worse, hadn't she? She had been through centuries of uncertainty, of running, of surviving. If she could stand here in this moment, so could he. Alec clenched his fists, and with a final steadying breath, he looked directly at the swirling shadows that crept toward him. I'm done hiding, he said, his voice steady, a quiet defiance in it. You're not getting in. Not now, not ever. The shadows hissed, recoiling as if they could feel the power of his words. The voices whispered louder now, desperate, seeking to worm their way into his mind. But Alec wasn't afraid anymore. He focused on the presence next to him, on Ilara's quiet strength, and he pushed back against the whispers. You are nothing, he said firmly. You're just a trick of the mind. And I won't let you control me. The shadows writhed, momentarily unstable, as if they weren't prepared for his resistance. But then, slowly, they began to retreat, slipping back into the corners of the room, their presence diminishing as though they were being pulled away by some invisible force. Alec's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't look away. Not now. Not when he could feel the darkness faltering. Ilara stepped closer to him, her hand brushing against his shoulder as if offering silent support. Well done, she said, her voice warm with approval. You're learning? Alec exhaled a long, shaky breath, and for the first time that night, the cabin felt lighter. The air wasn't as thick. The shadows had receded, and the humming, the pressure, the whispers, everything was gone. He could hear the rain outside, soft now, the storm subsiding. It wasn't over, not yet, but for now they had won. He turned to Ilara, his heart still racing, but a sense of relief washing over him. I think I understand now. I don't have to be afraid of them. No, she replied, her eyes still glowing faintly. Fear will always be there. It's how you choose to face it that matters. Alec's lips curved into a tentative smile. I think I've got a lot to learn. You have all the time in the world, she said softly, her voice a gentle promise. As the last remnants of the shadows melted away, the cabin fell into a quiet peace, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire. Alec stood a little taller, his shoulders a little less burdened, and as the storm finally passed, he felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Oh. Ilara's hand lingered on his shoulder for just a moment longer, then she stepped back, giving him space. She didn't speak again, but the quiet understanding between them said everything that needed to be said. For the first time in a long while, Alec didn't feel so alone. The night wore on, but neither of them slept. They didn't need to. There would be more challenges ahead, more darkness to face, more cracks to heal. But for now, Alec knew he could stand in the silence, and in that silence he wasn't afraid anymore. And that, perhaps, was enough.